Welcome to the Locker Room to Boardroom podcast. I'm Ryan Blake, Director of Ryan Blake Performance Coaching and your host. This podcast is for senior leaders operating inside elite sport. Executives, directors, managers, coaches, ultimately decision makers carrying sustained responsibility, scrutiny and pressure. The purpose of this conversation is simple: to explore how leadership actually functions under pressure, not how it's described in theory. We focus on judgment, decision-making, authority and sustainability. The systems that protect performance when stakes are high, time is limited and expectations don't ease. This isn't a motivational show. It's not about mindset hacks or inspirational stories. It's about understanding what allows high performance to hold up over time, minimizing unnecessary stress, maximizing personal fulfillment, and building leadership systems that last. In this episode, I'm speaking with Chris Dossett. Chris has spent more than 30 years in education, including over 20 years as a Director of Sport across 4 schools. He's also Chair of the Professional Association for Directors of Sport in Independent Schools, PADSIS, supporting and representing school sport leaders across the UK. Rather than focusing on titles or achievements, this conversation explores what leadership really looks like in school sport, creating environments where participation, enjoyment, well-being and performance can coexist, while leading staff, pupils and parents through an increasingly demanding landscape. We discuss the realities that often sit beneath the surface of leading sport and education, balancing expectations with opportunity, building culture over time, maintaining standards without losing enjoyment, and why the environments we create often have greater long-term impact than results themselves. This is a conversation for anyone responsible for leading people, shaping culture, and creating environments where others can thrive. Right, let's begin. Chris, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on. Please, can you start by giving a brief introduction to our listeners about your personal and professional background?
Well, first of all, family first. Got a lovely wife, Jan. I went to Loughborough together. I was captain of rugby. She was captain of hockey. We've been married for 32 years, and I've got 2 lovely girls. Kira is 28, Megan's 26, and they both still enjoy physical activity. And it's actually quite telling for me. They both played lots of sport at school, but now they enjoy running and park run and high rocks and stuff. So I think that's, when we talk about longevity and love of physical activity, that's important. Career-wise, always wanted to be a PE teacher since I was about 10. Always wanted to go to Loughborough University. So I was very lucky, went to Loughborough, trained to be a teacher. I was a PE teacher for 32 years, I think. Wow. And then I was a director of sport in 4 different schools. And then 2-3 years ago, I took over as chair of PADSIS. So PADSIS is the Professional Association of Directors of Sport in Independent Schools. And my purpose to myself, I say, is my job is to support directors of sport in any way I can and to make their jobs more enjoyable, because it should be a brilliant job. We're playing sport and physical activity and games with children all day. So I'm loving what I'm doing at the minute, and I do a school visit every week, and it's such a brilliant experience to go into a different school every week. I've said to a few people, if a director of sport could go into a different school every week, they'd be better for it, but no school's ever going to let you have a day off every week. But school visits are free CPD, and there are so many fantastic directors of sport out there that there's so much to learn from all of them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that introduction. The first thing I wanted to ask you was what in your experience and everything you've seen and done, what do you believe leadership in school actually requires day to day, and specifically kind of beyond fixtures and results?
Well, I think, first of all, it's about service. If you're a teacher and you're a leader, ultimately your job is to make better children. And when they leave school, they're better people. And if they're good at sport or English or maths or science, that's almost, in my opinion, relevant. I genuinely think, as a leader within a sports department, so a director of sport, it is a service role. It's definitely one of mentoring as well. And whether that's mentoring your athletes or, more importantly, sometimes mentoring your team. So you're probably, in most independent schools, you could have anywhere from 2 to 15 in your department, and then, lots of other teachers getting involved in sport. So it's important that you sell them, if you like, your vision for sport. And as you alluded to there, for me, within schools, the benefits are far, far, far beyond winning and losing. And, I often go into a school and I say, look, you've got 100 kids in your upper sixth. That's 1,000 that have left your school in the last 10 years. How many of them are actually making a living out of playing sport? And the answer is 1, 2, 3. So we really have got to look at how can we instill that lifelong love of physical activity for so many reasons, whether that's social, making friends, whether that's, for your mental health, your physical health. But also, I think more importantly, we need to celebrate the multi benefits of playing sport. And I read a really
Hmm.
good article in The Observer recently that actually said why playing sport is good for you, even if you're not any good at it, because the skills that you learn from leadership, for example, listening, compassion, kindness, strategy, bouncing back from a loss or an injury. So I think within schools, they're the things that, we've got to be working on, but always remember that ultimately the pupil comes first. It's their game. As I say to a lot of people, it's not our game. So your leadership almost stems from, if you like, your purpose. So
Hmm.
that's what I believe.
Fantastic. And do you feel that the pressures facing directors of sport now have changed from what they used to be?
Massively. And I say this a lot, I started as a director of sport over 20 years ago. There was no social media. There was very little email. I was just about learning how to use a computer. And my job as director of sport was really to make sure the teams were up on a whiteboard by Friday. So the teams would be ready to play. The shirts are washed, the balls are out, et cetera, et cetera. The job is massive nowadays. And it involves, so for instance, some directors of sport will have a budget of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Some people won't have a GCSE grade C in maths, or will have they're not mathematicians. In the current climate with VAT on school fees, people are being made redundant, for instance. And, we're not trained HR executives either. We're, safeguarding the gender balance quite rightly. I think maybe 20 years ago, rugby particularly was the main sport within independent schools, as long as your first team rugby team are doing all right. Whereas, quite rightly now, we've got so many different sports in schools, and there genuinely is now gender equality about, the performance of girls, what they're offered. You've got to mentor your department. You've got to be a performance coach. You've got to be a mental skills coach. There are just so many different plates nowadays that you have to spin. So it's a multi-skilled role now. And therefore, I think the training for it is really, really important.
Absolutely. So you alluded to earlier about sport needing to be enjoyable for young people. Why do you think it is that some environments can lose sight of that under the pressure to perform in their role?
I think because, and again, particularly in schools, let's take parents, for instance. If you read the back page of the Telegraph or the Daily Mail, it's, so-and-so's lost a football game at the weekend. They need to be sacked. GB didn't win enough Olympic gold medals at the last Olympics, so someone's head's got to roll. Manchester City, didn't win the Premiership this year, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're not in that world. In my opinion, there's no such thing as elite sport in schools. So therefore, we have to work out, again, what is our purpose of schools, sport, and how we communicate that to people. I think that's the difficulty sometimes, is communicating to parents the multiple benefits of sport and physical activity beyond winning and losing. And quite often, again, if you ask anybody, tell me, a sports score of when you were 13, the majority of people can't even tell you, but they can tell you the memories. They tell you their friends, or they can tell you a funny story from the back of the bus or the change room or whatever it may be. So I do think that we need to be better communicating to, probably the two bodies we need to be better to communicate to are our parents and our
Mhm.
senior leadership team. And there's been a bit of research that came out a couple of months ago about why maybe overseas don't have a good relationship with physical activity. And that's because when they were at school, and again, this would be 30, 40 years ago, sport was different and it was taught differently. My opinion is sport, physical activity, physical education has never been taught better than it is today. But cast your mind back 40 years, you're in a PE lesson where it was for the alphas, it was for the A team. And if you weren't good at sport, you were shouted at and punished and teased. And that was just by the staff, genuinely. Therefore, I think for a lot of people in their over 30s, and some of those people are in leadership positions now, whether that be in government, whether that
Hmm.
be head teachers, SLT, their relationship with physical activity was not a good one. So is it any price, or they don't understand the benefits to it? So that's for us to, as I say, educate people to the many, many, many benefits of being physically active. And, particularly, again, my opinion is that for school sport, the number one objective should be, it should be fun and enjoyable. That doesn't mean it can't be
Hmm.
challenging. And, I always say, I remember in my first year at school, year 7, Scott Flashman was one of my best friends. And in week 6 of gymnastics, after 6 weeks of trying, Scott did a forward roll. And literally the whole class stood up and clapped him. Now, that's high performance for Scott at that time. For me, high performance, you do the best you can with the resources you've got in this actual moment. And again, that fun and enjoyable bit is important. And you know what, Ryan, my personal opinion is, when it is fun and enjoyable, we tend to win more games anyway. And when we put pressure on kids, I mean, no one performs well under pressure, but children particularly have not got the mental skills to deal with pressure. And if you're going to berate them every time they lose or miss a goal, or, it's not going to work in the long run.
Hmm. Absolutely. I completely agree. I've been in many high performance environments like we discussed before recording, and the best outcomes were in the most organic environments which people
Yeah.
wanted to be in.
Yeah. Agreed.
For me, there's a complete direct link between the two.
I was just going to say there, just to follow up on that, Ryan, I sometimes reflect on, school environments that I've worked in and been in. And sometimes when you ask people to explain why they have performed so successfully, they struggle sometimes, because the cause has been through great relationships, connections, that feeling of belonging between the staff and the pupils who just want to be there because it's a great place, of people who just want to get better because they want to get better. I don't know if you've seen the new Rafa Nadal documentary, but I saw a brilliant quote that I'm going to use ad infinitum now. He says, "I'm not a winner, I'm a competitor." And every single one of us can be a competitor to be the best that you can be. And I thought, what a fantastic sentence. And if all of us are just competitors to be the best we can be, we're going to win a few, we're going to lose a few. In the whole independent school sector, the win-loss ratio is 50-50, you know, because that's the nature of it. So I really like that idea that we can all be competitors. We can all strive to be the best that we can be, because that is genuinely all you can do. So yeah, I think again that is important. And we talk about competitive games as there's 10 minutes to go and we don't know who's going to win. So even as a teacher or a coach, sometimes you have to manipulate the game in some way, shape or form to make sure it's competitive. And then wins, I don't really care. But within life, I believe you want to put yourself in those 50-50 situations where you've got to use your skills and your tactics and your strategy and how you get the best out of your teammates and all those sorts of things, because they're life skills. And the fact you did it in an under 13 badminton match or swimming gala or hockey tournament is almost irrelevant. It's those skills that you pick up, which I think are so important.
Absolutely. The one thing that I've taken away from being in a lot of performance environments with young athletes, whether that's academies or schools, is that everyone's performance arena is different and everyone's performance requirements are different. Even if they're there for the same sport or they're playing on the same team, it's not the same as the person next to them. There is going to be micro differences, in some cases macro differences if they're playing up age groups and etc. Completely agree with you. Next thing I just wanted to ask you is, across the schools and the teams that you've led, what behaviors do you find consistently build trust with pupils, with staff, with parents?
Okay, so again, I've picked this up recently, and it really sort of resonated with me. This idea as
Hmm.
a coach or as a leader, you catch people in, you don't catch people out. And there's far too many people out there, I think, that want to catch people out. None of us work well in that environment. And I don't know if you're allowed to swear in your podcast, but it's like the shit sandwich. Who thinks that's a good idea? Genuinely, we all talk about it, but why do you have to find something wrong? And I genuinely think that if you lead in that environment of catching people in, not catching people out, of praising in public, of building people up, that when you want to challenge somebody, they understand that it's coming from a good place. Because I do want to challenge people. This isn't pink and fluffy and soft, but you have to build that environment of psychological safety, if you like, of trust, where I can challenge you and support you at the time because I want to make you better. And that's ultimately my goal as a leader, to make you better. And if I can help you in any way, shape, or form, that's important. So I think that's what the best environments are. The best environments are the ones where you go in and the kids turn up early, but they don't turn up early because they're forced to. They turn up early because they're loving it. Because if they turn up 5 minutes early, there's an early bird activity for them to do. There's some little skill, or the coach has got something planned, or, they're not just sitting down and doing the register. They're the kids that want to stay late, and you've got to say, actually, we need to pack the nets away today because look, the bell's going to go in a minute. Things like at the end of the lesson, the children pack the cones away or the equipment away because of the respect they have for just the environment, and they're not selfish. There are so many little things that I think make high performance, but it's the environment in the first place. So if I've created that environment where, everyone feels they can have a risk and have a go. So let's say I'm coaching a netball game today, and at the end of the first quarter, one of my girls has a shot from the edge of the circle and misses. Now I've got a choice here, three choices probably. I say nothing, fair enough. She comes off, say, "Oh, that is unbelievable. That taking a shot from there, that's gutsy. I'm really proud of you for that." Or, "What the bloody hell are you doing there? You've missed that shot." Well, again, when we talk through those three scenarios, and I see all three of those scenarios regularly in schools,
Yeah. Yeah.
why would you not pick option two? Why would you not say to that girl or that hockey boy who's just tried a reverse flick, or, rugby players played a crossfield kick for the first time, it's been intercepted and the other team scored. They're thinking, they're trying something new. And it doesn't take too much to work out that if you're going to just, catch people out all the time, berate them when they make mistakes or when they take risks, you're not going to get a high performing environment. Whereas if you are encouraging and supportive and, ask them questions, why did you try that? Oh, that was interesting. Talk me through, what did you see there? Brilliant. It's a no brainer for me. And when I see coaches on the touchline just screaming at children, it drives me crazy. And, we had a guy who spoke at our conference recently, and his company's called Minute Nine. And the reason it's called Minute Nine was he was watching his daughter play football when she was 11, and they lost a game, 11-year-old girls. And the coach sat them down on the floor and basically berated them for 9 minutes. Guess what? His daughter didn't want to play football after that. It just blows my mind sometimes how stupid some people are.
To add to your point about catching people in and catching people out, it's a similar concept I find in what you've just mentioned about positivity pushes people in and negativity pushes people out in most
Yeah,
environments,
agreed.
especially when they're young. And
Yeah,
it
agreed.
requires very little effort to do, and sometimes more effort to be negative. So I agree with you. Sometimes it does raise a question when people choose that default option, really, when they don't need to.
I mean, imagine every 6, 7, 8-year-old coaching session in the country. They
Mm.
turn up, you know their name. "Hi, Ryan, how you doing? How was your weekend?" You give them a high five. Let's say that was just the only thing you did.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, by doing something as simple as that, you've made that a welcome environment that they want to come back to. And surely and again, when, I'm 57, why do I go to the gym and train? I go to the gym and train actually not necessarily to be physical fit, but to have a chat with my friends and see what they did over the weekend. So I keep going back to that gym because I feel like I belong, because I can be with different people every day. I can have a different conversation about what they did over the weekend. They can ask me questions. And so the social side of it for me is now almost more important than the physical and the mental. But for different people, it doesn't matter which of those strands works for you. But, you know, simply when children are younger, make them feel welcome, challenge them, make sure it's fun. And I think if you cultivate that high trust, high support, that's where you're going to get your high performance environment. And again, I'll just go back to, for me, high performance is doing the best you can with the resources you've got today.
Mhm,
So I'm not
mhm.
talking about, winning the World Cup here. I'm talking about maybe a kid kicking a ball with his left foot for the first time ever, or catching a hard ball cricket ball for the first time in their life, whatever it may be.
It's a fascinating topic, and it's so multifaceted, and we could chat for a lot more about this one specific thing.
Yeah.
And just to kind of move on to just talk about something slightly different. Through through your role with PADSIS, what do you currently think leadership challenges are that the directors of sport are dealing with most right now nationally?
I'll take a micro and a macro, if you like. So the micro is
Yeah.
what a lot of, I think, leaders are struggling in is to look after themselves. You know, it's this environment. I'm going to be the first into the office. I'm going to be the last out. I'm not very good at delegating because people will think I'm lazy if I delegate. I said to you before, we had Sally Needham. She's a neuroscientist speak at our conference a couple of years ago, and she talked to us about the imperative of self-regulation. As a leader, if you're not a self-regulated human, it's very difficult for you to lead another self-regulated human. Sally would talk about what can we do in our daily lives deliberately to make ourselves more regulated. And for everybody, it will be different. So it might be you do half an hour of yoga before you go to work. It might be you have a cold shower. It might be you cycle into school. It might be you have plants in your office. You go for a walk, for 2 minutes every hour and see daylight. It might be, you chat with a friend or a colleague at school. It doesn't matter what it is, but I think we need to be, as leaders, more deliberate about looking after ourselves. And again, another thing is managing our digital communication, if you like, and making sure that we've got boundaries around email and WhatsApp. So I think the best schools for me are the ones who have email curfew. And I would say this to my department: from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. That's fine. Outside of those hours, no email, no WhatsApp chat. But if you've got a problem and you need me, you can phone me at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'll pick up the phone for you.
Mhm.
Okay, but let's not get into that habit of sending a WhatsApp group message at 10:30 about something that can wait till 8 o'clock in the morning. And I do think that actually by doing that, you improve your human connection, because I think as a leader you
Mhm.
have to role model those things, and it is a strategic decision. It's going to make you a better leader if you can look after yourself. And this isn't selfish. And I would argue actually that maybe somebody who's working 12 hours a day flat, they might get more out of working 8 hours a day and just being more efficient. So I think that looking after yourself is really, really important. I suppose from a bigger perspective, it's being clear around what your purpose of school sport is. And you as a leader, I think the best leaders out there are values driven, purpose driven. So be clear with your community, with your staff, with your pupils, with your parents, with your governors, SLT, whatever, you know, what is it that we are trying to achieve here? So the Simon Sinek, why? Why do I get up every morning to go to school? What is my purpose? Because I think once you have a clear purpose, those other decisions become a lot easier. They're easier to articulate. They're easier to, it's like you've got a North Star, if you like, and you can go back to that. But
Absolutely.
do you think that the best directors of sport, they manage their time precisely? So I know a head who talked about making email great again. His name's Nick Weaver. He's a brilliant man. And he said as a head, he would read his email at 8:30, 12:30 and 5:30 for half an hour. He's not touching his email at any other time during the day. So if a head can do that, we can do that, because then if I can manage my time and if I'm more self-regulated, I can dedicate more space for strategic planning, for mentoring, for reflection. Uh, I'm not allowing, if you like, the administrative minutiae, the things that really somebody else should be doing it if you're a director of sport. Your job is strategic, mentoring, long-term vision stuff. So I think for me, they're the two, things on a smaller scale, making sure you can self-regulate yourself, but on a wider scale, having clarity around your purpose and make sure you communicate it well.
Fantastic. Lots of golden nuggets there for the listeners, Chris. Thank you very much for sharing that. Just a kind of sub question or a follow on to that. What pressures do you feel that sports leaders, sports directors pretend they can handle better than they actually can in your experience?
Wow. What can they? That is a great question. You know what? I think I can't think of anything specific, but what I
Mhm.
can say is, look, we need to be honest about what we can and can't handle. So another thing I'll say to directors of sport is you don't possess the God particle.
Mm.
As a leader, you shouldn't expect to know everything, but within your team, you've probably got people that can help you. So seeking help, whether that's within your environment or looking outside your environment, whether it's listening to podcasts, going to a university visit, researching papers, whatever is your thing, we can all get better. And I think when we have this idea that it is a weakness to ask for help or admit that you can't do something, I think that's when you're going to get yourself into trouble. So I think if I was in a departmental meeting and I had someone who was brilliant at giving feedback, for argument's sake, well, I tell you what, Ryan, I saw your lesson last week and the way you gave feedback to those girls in the hockey set, why don't you share with the rest of the group what you think is, your golden nuggets for giving feedback? Or maybe somebody else is brilliant at organization, so they can organize the fixtures. Maybe somebody else is better at, organizing sports tours. Maybe somebody else is better at teaching gymnastics than you are, whatever it may be. So I do think that, first of all, this is where we can catch people in going back to that and saying, oh, so and so's great gymnastics teacher. When, you're a new ECT teacher. Why don't you go and watch John coach's gymnastics lesson because he's actually really, really good at that. Or Sarah, what Sarah's good at is motivating the kids who don't think they're very good. And by the 2 weeks with Sarah, these kids are buzzing and working really hard. Why don't you go and see what Sarah does with? And I think that's important again. And it's going to help with your self-regulation again. Another Sally Needham saying that you can't pour from an empty cup. So what are you doing to fill your cup every day? And a lot of that, you've got to take that from other people. And I think when people see that leaders themselves are looking to improve, asking for help, it gives them permission to, you know, look to improve and ask for help as well. So I think that's really important for leaders.
Absolutely. It's just reminded me of a conversation I had the other day with an athletic director in the States, actually. And he was saying that you almost have to treat your body a bit like your phone. So you have
Mhm.
to update it when it needs to be updated. You need to charge it when it's running low on battery, and you need to turn it off sometimes. So
Yeah.
it's completely resting and recovering. And I feel that is such a missed point because people try so hard to deliver their best all the time that they it's so easy to forget to look after yourself. So it makes a lot of sense.
You can't be on it all the time.
100%. It's
Yeah.
impossible because it will just wear out and stop in the end, won't it? And I've seen that happen in many environments, and it could be so easily managed um, with such a simple intervention. Sometimes just people either aren't open to it, aren't aware of it, or it's too late, which is a shame. Just last question: if there's a director of sport listening to this and they're really struggling right now to sustain performance, look after themselves, and really do need some help, but they might not be too willing to admit that. What would be your takeaway piece of advice to them?
Okay. Well, if you're in an independent school and you're a member of PADSIS, or you know what, even if you're not, generally my job, as I said, my purpose is to support directors of sport in any way I can and make their jobs more enjoyable. So if they want to call me or send me an email, I'm happy to help. And you know what? Sometimes within an environment, it's a lot easier to speak to somebody outside your environment. So quite often I do a school visit every week, and normally about 1 or 2 o'clock after lunch, I say to me, Dos, I'm really struggling with this at a minute, or I'm going home. My wife is giving me hassle about it. How did you do with it? And I think when you've got someone outside your environment, that's easy. So genuinely, I'm more than willing to help, talk, support to any director of sport out there. I also think I would recommend that you get yourself a buddy or a critical ear, if you like, again, outside your environment. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. I know some directors of sport who have, buddies, if you like, that work in the military, work in business, was maybe even a friend of theirs at school that works in another environment. But I do think it is crucial that you have the opportunity to share with somebody else, and that might be your partner as well. And I think that's really, really important. So my advice would be, and I've been there, genuinely. I've been there when, I've been working in a place where I didn't feel supported. I felt, the leadership was poor. And for a while, I just cocooned it all in my head. And the only person I told was my wife. And it wasn't healthy for me, genuinely. But once I started speaking to a few other people, you realize that other people are going through the same sort of stuff, and they can help you with X, Y, and Z. And, I think you were talking about optimism earlier. There's a brilliant book called Flourish by Martin Seligman. And in it, he says, one of the best things you can do to feel good about yourself is help somebody else. And whenever, so if I ask somebody for help, first of all, I'm going to feel better for it because it's a cathartic process. But also that other person, you always feel better when you can do something to help somebody else. So don't forget that. I always say to people, what would you say to someone if they came to you with your problems? And of course, you'd say, oh, yeah, I can help you with this. Or what about this? Or what about that? But sometimes we get in our own heads. So, reach out is, sometimes really difficult to do. But once you've done it, it does make life a lot easier. And genuinely, I mean that wholeheartedly. If anyone does want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to offer any support that I can.
Brilliant advice. What is the best way they could do that, Chris?
Email me. So it's dead easy. My email is chris@padsis.com, PADSIS. Just send me an email and we'll take it from there.
Brilliant. Well, if anyone listening would like to do that, then I'll put the link directly into the show notes. But please do reach out to Chris if you'd like a chat or to run something by him. It's very kind of him to offer that. Chris, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. You've given a lot of really useful and positive insights to our listeners. So wishing you well for everything you've got lined up for 2026, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks, Ryan. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If you found this conversation useful, consider sharing it with someone operating in a similar role. Leadership at this level is rarely experienced in isolation. For more on sustainable high performance under pressure, you can find additional resources at ryanblakeperformancecoaching.com, including the performance profile assessment, past podcast episodes, and written insights focused on decision quality, energy, and leadership longevity. If this work is relevant to how you're operating, details on current courses, programs, and consultancy support are available there as well. Until next time, take care.